All right.
And we are live on YouTube.
Live on YouTube, live on Zoom. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Poppy Hour. Hope everyone's day is going as well as can be in these times.
Yeah, how are you doing, Margaret?
Oh, I'm okay. I attended an advanced sculpture class online today at UC Irvine, taught by the artist Liz Glynn, who's a member of Theater Pain. Yeah, nice. Really grateful to be thinking about art right now and reading essays about making art in a time of crisis, and just yeah, it's a good.
Yeah, totally.
How are you today, Evan?
I am good today. I definitely had like a moment this week when I found out that John Prine passed, where I was like, okay, that's enough. I can't handle this anymore. But then like the next morning I got up and there was a bloom on my beaver tail cactus, and I felt good, even though I was very sad because I love John Prine. I grew up listening to him. My parents, we'd drive around the back roads of Massachusetts where I grew up listening to John Prine. So that one really stung. But otherwise, hanging in there. It's just such a weird time, but excited to be here with everybody, and hope you're all staying safe and healthy and making it through these strange times. And we're excited to welcome you to Poppy Hour for the inaugural episode. Do we want to, well, what is Poppy Hour, Margaret?
I think we might all have slightly different definitions for what Poppy Hour is. Mine is that it's an experimental live internet show, and we're using Zoom and YouTube to broadcast. It's interactive. We want people to ask questions through the Q&A box. And also on YouTube, there's a way to engage and ask questions. I see it as an experimental community art project. Everyone who attends is really a collaborator, and it's something positive to keep the community together during the pandemic. That's my definition of Poppy Hour. What's yours, Evan?
Ooh, okay. Well, I'll get to that, but we should probably introduce ourselves. I just realized. So I am Evan Meyer, the executive director at the Theodore Payne Foundation. We have Margaret Oakley, who coordinates our garden tour. And then we also have Philip Otto. Can you say hi real quick, Philip? He's also up online with us.
Yeah, hey, Evan, thank you. I also coordinate the annual native plant garden tour and am the in-house graphic designer for Theodore Payne, and engineering this broadcast. Really happy to be here. And I look forward to being in an actual field of lupin at some point in the near future.
He's like the tech brains behind the operation. All right, so what is Poppy Hour? Interesting. I don't really know. No, I do know. It's an opportunity for our community to keep connecting and to keep sharing the love of California native plants, the love of biodiversity, the love of Southern California, and to hopefully use this as an opportunity to assess our thoughts and to build capacity in our community, and to bring new people into the fold, and to think through our perceptions of what we're doing. And so I've been thinking about it as like a two-sided thing. One side, we're going to have a very practical, kind of straightforward message of how do you grow a California native plant garden. And so that's going to be the first half of every show. We're going to go to different gardens around the city, talk to the homeowners, hear their stories, check out their plants, learn what they did, why they did it, and hopefully get inspired. So if you're just new to the gardening world, this is going to be a great show for you to see people who have been doing it and are really good at it. And so that's going to be part of the show. The other part of the show is going to be kind of a more headier, sort of like intellectual journey of what does this even mean? Like, what is the philosophical ramifications of planting a garden? And to me, there are a lot, and they kind of untangle into all these amazing stories and ways that we connect. So I've been thinking about this on different scales. So there's the physical scale. We have that one plant that we planted. We have that one garden that we planted. We have our one city, our region, our state, our country, the world. And so I want to utilize this conversation to think into some of those areas and think through those different scales and how they interact with one another. And then there's the time scale, right? The temporal scale. So you have the past, and how has the past influenced our landscape and how we think about it and how we develop our landscape. Obviously, there's the whole colonial past of Southern California that has brought in this crazy suite of plants, and we're in some ways trying to bring back a kind of pre-colonial landscape with these native plant gardens. There's the deep past where, 5 million years ago, the native plant flora was completely different in Southern California, and I hope we can explore that. And then there's the future, and that's really where I want to, you to think through in this show is like, where are we going, and what can we do as a community to make the earth more biodiverse and to live more harmoniously with nature. Yeah, so
it's really good. I like that you're wanting to think critically about the native plant movement while you're the executive director of an organization that's been a really big part of the native plant movement since 1960. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, maybe not critically, because I totally believe in it. Well, I guess just think, go deep and examine. And if coronavirus and COVID gives us an opportunity, it's an opportunity to like evaluate things. It's like we're basically at this historical precipice where it's like there's the world before coronavirus and the world after. And I think it's useful for us as a community to have these conversations now so that we can set the trajectory to where we want, in this next phase of life.
I use criticality in the art school way, so it's more of a positive exercise of thinking hard together.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Can we introduce Andrew, who's
is Andrew? Oh yeah, where is Andrew? Is he on there?
Hi, Andrew.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Can hear you. Who are you, Andrew?
Me? I'm Andrew Chavez, the Director of Operations at Theodore Payne Foundation. I came in 2 minutes late, so I don't know what's going on.
We're just
Andrew?
Chatting.
Yeah, we're just chatting.
We're chit-chatting. We're trying to define what Poppy Hour is. And the thing about Poppy Hour is going to change. It's like it's pretty unscripted, as you can probably already tell. We're kind of just going with what we think is interesting. And you, the audience, whoever's tuned in right now, you're part of this. Like, send out some questions, comments. Like, what do you want this show to be? We're building it. We're building the airplane as it's flying.
Sounds dangerous, but really, really rad. Hi, Larry. Hi, Erica. And hi, Matt. Thanks for saying hello.
I guess. All right, can I do a couple of TPF news updates and then we'll introduce our guest?
Yeah, I really especially want to hear how the native plant takeout program is going these days.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so it's been a crazy, crazy time at Theodore Payne Foundation. Obviously, it's been a crazy time for everyone, but Theodore Payne Foundation is a big part of our organization, is a retail nursery. And we shut that down almost a month ago now, the direct, the sales yard, just because we just didn't feel confident that we could keep our customers and staff physically distanced. So we also closed the bookstore. We quickly reopened with a takeout order system, and that's been actually going quite well. We're selling a lot of plants through it, and people are able to go out in the garden and work on their gardens during this time. It's one kind of thing you can do when you're basically stuck at home. Nurseries are essential businesses, which I think is pretty cool. so we're allowed to stay open, and we decided to sell plants only this way, basically to keep everyone safe and keep our staff safe, which is extremely important to us. But if you're ordering plants, thank you. It's so helpful. Like, it's a really tough time for us to shut down because this is our major revenue time of year. But just bear with us. We are gardeners. We're not computer programmers. So we're doing our best to streamline the process and make it efficient. But we have a lot of orders coming in every day, which is a good problem, but we're trying to sort them out and honor them as quickly as we can. And we're going to be using this time to actually enhance our kind of online infrastructure. Our online store is also up. And the wildflower hotline is still going, even though it's a little bit like weird because you can't actually go to the places, but we made the decision to keep it going. I was like, I love hearing Joe Spano, who reads the wildflower hotline. I just love hearing him talk. It's so comforting to me. And he talks about like the lupins are blooming, and he's got this great kind of like almost jazz cadence when he does it, that I find very peaceful, and just knowing that the plants are blooming, even if I can't see them, gives me hope.
Yeah, it's great to know that what's happening, even if we can't see it. I agree.
Yeah, and then the one other thing that I should mention is that we've had so many folks, and probably some of you listening, who have made donations or renewed their memberships. That is so appreciated. You know, this is a time when cash flow is really difficult for a lot of small businesses, including Theodore Payne. So those donations are probably the most helpful thing you can do. And I just can't thank you enough. So many people have stepped up in the past couple of weeks, and we really appreciate it. And we can't wait to, you know, honor those gifts and get you guys all together to have fun and connect in community. You know, in the real world, not the virtual world, which we will be back to someday. Yeah, thank you. And if you haven't made a donation, but you would like to, it's very easy. Go to our website, theodorepayne.org, and any amount is so helpful. So thank you to everyone who has done that. Is there any other stuff we should talk about, Margaret, or can we get to the show, get to our guest?
Yeah, I think it's time to introduce Naomi. And I know that you used to work for Naomi, your former boss. So yes. I know you're ready to give the intro.
Yeah, it's kind of, I never thought that I would be introducing my former boss on an internet TV show, but here we are. So
a lot of never thought I'd be doing this kind of moments these days.
So Dr. Naomi Fraga is a very well-known person in the Southern California botany world. She has a pretty amazing story, which I hope we can talk about a little bit later, which is that she's an LA native, grew up here, and got interested in plants, and through an internship at what was previously known as Rancho Santa Ana Botanical Garden, now California Botanic Garden. She kind of found out that she could do this as a career, and she went on to get her master's thesis there, doing a inventory of plants in the Sierra Nevada Mountains, Southern Sierra Nevada Mountains, and then did her PhD studying monkey flowers, which many of you probably grow in your garden. She's the one who changed their scientific name from Mimulus to Diplochus and Erythranthe. So that's impressive unto itself to go and get these degrees and do the science. But what's really impressive is that during that time, she was also working full-time and building a program that she runs now, which is the conservation programs at California Botanic Garden, which are very extensive and complicated, and they do a lot of different things. That's what we're going to talk about after we see her garden. So very impressive person who's very well known in the community of plant people in Southern California. I'm not sure if everyone knows that she's a really great gardener too, which is kind of fun. So I think this is going to be cool to see Naomi's house and garden. That's what we're going to start with. So welcome, Naomi.
Thank you for having me, Evan. It's really nice to talk to you about my garden.
Yeah, and I find that when people kind of have this expert background, they tend to make really interesting decisions about how they will garden. Maybe a little bit different than a lot of other people who are just starting out or just learning about California native plants and gardening with them. Naomi, will you tell us a little bit about the history of the garden and maybe play around with showing us a view of your garden? I have tidy tips as my background because you have this amazing, lovely yellow flower bloom going on.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and switch and pan over to my garden. This is my garden. I only have currently a native plant garden in the front yard, but I purchased this house in 2011, December of 2011, and immediately the next season, the next year, immediately after I moved in, I started building this garden. And the first thing I did was a lot of work to kill the lawn. And I was just basically preparing for planting in the fall of 2012. It's not that, it's a fairly young garden, but you could see I have some mature plants. I have that big berry manzanita right there that is now towering and like 6 feet tall. So the garden has matured quite nicely. And I'm fortunate. I always used to think before I ever had a garden, and I've done a lot of work, as a botanist, and part of my work is to map invasive plants. And I always thought if I ever had my little plot of land, I would just make sure I got every single weed out of there, and I would do all this wonderful restoration, and it'd be so great. And my yard is not that large, and now I understand the difficulties of managing invasive plants, even in a small plot of land. So I greatly appreciate all the people who work in invasive plant management. Thank you for all you do. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Naomi, your garden is in Pomona. And someone just asked that.
Yes.
So you're kind of in this inland gets pretty hot in the summer, but looks very lush right now. Did you guys get a bunch of rain in this?
Oh yeah, you can see. So this is my field of tidy tips right here. And they're all kind of tamped down a bit because I estimate my rain gauge broke. So I don't exactly know how much rain I got. It broke late last year and I haven't replaced it, but I think I've probably gotten about 4 inches of rain in the past 5 days, which is very significant. This is an inland garden. It's pretty warm, several days over 100 degrees in the summer, and average rainfall about 15 inches of rain a year. So a little bit on the dry side, not quite desert, but not, exactly lush. This garden is full sun. I don't have any tree cover right now. You could see over there, I have a Calicidris decurrens that I'm starting, but I don't have any shade. But it is north facing, so I think that helps quite a bit. And I also have really great soil. It's very wonderful loamy soil, and I feel like I can grow a lot of different things here in this garden.
I in the chat here on Zoom, I shared a link to the Twitter feed that you made about the garden, and maybe Philip can put that into the YouTube comment section as well for people to check out. You do a really good job of detailing your process. Susan asked, how did you kill the grass? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Everyone always wants to know how people kill lawns. And I also thought it was really interesting how you're thinking about climate adaptation for your location. And you had mentioned to me previously that you're thinking of Pomona as having a climate that will shift to be more like Morongo Valley in the next decade. So that's a really interesting perspective, thinking about a future climate, gardening for a future climate.
Yeah, definitely. So with respect to killing the lawn, I use the sheet mulching method, or, similar, what's called the lasagna method. So I didn't dig out any grass at all. I covered it with cardboard, wet down the cardboard, and put several inches of mulch on top. And I watered that in, and I basically let it sit all summer and kind of bake and decompose and do its nice, decomposition process. And then I dug into it in the fall to plant these plants. And I say it did a pretty good job. I killed the lawn. I don't have any lawn left, although I have a couple of stubborn corners where there was a lot of Bermuda grass intermixed. It was the lawn. I think the method you use, a lot of it depends on what your lawn is composed of. And it was not, it was a mixture of species of weed species. So like dandelions and erodium, filary, these kinds of things mixed with various kinds of grass, probably a lot of Poa annua, but then also a lot of Bermuda grass. And so I did kill the majority of my Bermuda grass. So I just have a few stubborn spots where I just constantly am digging it out. I didn't use any herbicide, and I didn't dig, like I didn't kind of dig out any soil. I wanted to leave as much soil in as possible.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that method, and I understand solarizing with plastic and why people do it, but I too prefer the sheet mulching with cardboard. It seems more sustainable to me.
Yeah, and I didn't want to use plastic. I didn't want to use chemicals. I wanted to try to just basically create a nice environment sort of immediately for plants to go into and for it to just decompose on its own. The mulch I used, I was very inexperienced with gardening when I started, and I didn't know how much mulch I would need to cover this amount of area. And I very much underestimated. And I started out kind of buying some mulch from Home Depot and realized that was not going to get me very far. Very quickly, I realized that after one trip. So I called a local tree trimming company, and I asked them to unload their mulch from their tree trimming out in my yard, and I happened to get pine, so that I didn't really have a choice. They just sort of like, these are the trees we chopped down, but I'm sure there's other ways to do it. But it worked out fine. I believe pine might add some like acidity into the soil. I'm not really up on my soil chemistry.
I think so. That's my understanding. Will you walk out to the sidewalk and show us
Oh yes,
the view from the sidewalk?
So this is my path.
And something I love that I found really interesting that we talked about earlier this week was your choice of mixing really local native plants with hybrids, like the agaves. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that.
Sure. So I'm really interested in straight species for the most part. And like Margaret said, I'm also interested in climate adaptation. So I have, the other thing to note is there's no irrigation system at all in this garden. I have a hose where I can water this manzanita if I feel like we didn't get very much rain this year, or put a little extra water on the incense cedar, the Caliscedrus decurrens. But other than that, I have no sprinkler system, no irrigation system. And so I wanted to integrate mostly straight species. And I thought the best species probably to incorporate would be those that would naturally have occurred here, because those would probably require the least amount of water. And then I've also experimented with lots of different desert species, like thinking about climate adaptation into the future. And we've had, when I started my garden, several first years of my garden up until last year were all drought years. And so I was receiving I was lucky, 6 inches of rain annually, which is essentially desert conditions. And so I have incorporated a lot of desert species, but what I found from my soil, because it's so rich, some of the desert species just go bonkers and they kind of fall over on themselves. So I've actually had a little bit more success with species that are local to this area. And so I have a lot of penstemons, which I'll kind of zoom over to my penstemon patch. Well, first, and I do have these hybrids. So this is my favorite hybrid. This is agave blue flame here. And it's interesting because I do really want to incorporate species that will support wildlife, species that are climate appropriate, Those are the main two criteria I'm thinking of to populate my garden with. And the agave blue flame is not really, I mean, it's a native plant in that it has native plant lineage in it, but it's a hybrid between a Mexican agave attenuata, and a California agave goes down to Baja California, agave shai. And so it's interesting because it's sort of like part California, part other part of the world. But I think it's cool.
Yeah.
I love it.
And they add really nice structure since you do have a lot of wildflowers. They add just really nice visual structure in the garden as contrast. So
Yeah.
I like how they're on either side of the pathway there.
Yeah, so I'm going to give some credit to my friend Antonio Sanchez, he helped me conceptualize a lot of the design in the garden. And he's the one that suggested that I put these two agaves on either side of the path. Although I would say I've had a little bit of problem because these agaves really grow and they keep growing into the path, even though I thought I spaced them out pretty far. And so this agave has three clumps now. And the main one that was planted, I actually had to take out because it was growing way far into the path.
Those are good agave problems to have.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants an agave blue flame, there's a one here that I'm willing to share.
Ooh, you're gonna give away pups. I think.
Yeah, I do give away pups.
We might have to do it as a raffle or something.
Right.
Hey, Naomi, I'm wondering, what do you do in the summer? Do you leave the annuals up, or do you cut them back?
So once the annuals dry up, I actually try to leave them as long as possible because they produce copious amounts of seeds and they feed the birds. And I'm really interested in feeding wildlife, and I will do that at the expense of looks. That's my personal philosophy. And so I'll leave them up as long as possible. Then at some point when I've noticed they've dispersed most of their seed, then I kind of take a rake to it and I just start to clear it out because they will leave dead standing material actually for quite a long time. And then, so I have a lot of the tidy chips there. That's the primary annual. It's actually mixed with lupinus bicolor, which doesn't have big showy flowers, so you really can't see it. But then over here, I have a lot of poppies and Baelia. The Baelia and the poppies, I tend to just kind of cut them and hope that they might resprout and kind of give another set of flowers. And then once I realize that they've really dried out and they're done, I eventually will kind of hand pull them once they're very, very dried out and they're not really feeding animals anymore. So I do a lot of the work by hand, which is like hand tools or just kind of pulling things out manually.
Our friend Susan Gottlieb, hi Susan, of the Gottlieb Native Garden, asked a question on YouTube. She noticed that your neighbors have lawns.
Yes,
and if you could speak to kind of the neighbor, the neighbor perspective on your garden.
Yeah. This is a mixed neighborhood. There's some yards in the neighborhood that integrate native plants and or drought tolerant plants. And there's a lot of lawns in the neighborhood. I'll be honest and say I've had code enforcement called on me multiple times. The first time I got it called on me was when I was actively killing my lawn and I didn't have any plants planted in. Fortunately, the code enforcement notice came in September when I had just purchased plants and I was ready to plant. So they said I just had to get some vegetation cover in and I was able to do that without getting a fine.
Maybe that's a badge of honor, having code.
Yeah, I actually posted it on my fridge and I was like, look at this. Code enforcement called on me. Another time I've got code enforcement called on me was related to the annuals. And it said that I had standing dead vegetation and that I had to clear it. And I kind of, was like, okay, I guess I let these go for long enough. And it was more of an aesthetic issue. I don't think it's a hazard to anyone. And so
Here.
I think the thing that I think about is I know at this time of year, everyone in my neighborhood is appreciating the garden because it's a super bloom. It's a wildflower field. I see people walk past it, especially now that I'm working from home. My desk inside the house, it's that window right there, faces the garden. And I see people every day stop and look, like they take multiple seconds, almost a minute. People are walking through the neighborhood, they're just passing by every house. But I have people who stop and actually are looking. I've had people ask me questions. Where did you get your plants? How did you do this? And they're particularly interested in certain species like the Baelia. Right here, I have Baelia multiradiata all over the place.
Love that one, desert marigold.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Naomi, can you show one of your Erigeron parisiae? Are they blooming now?
oh no, they're not blooming. This is the
Uh-huh.
time of year where they're kind of hunkered down. It's actually, I just have one and it is underneath the leia in there. So I usually find it, sometimes I think I've lost it, and then I'll dig out the leia, and in the summertime is when it blooms, and then I'll be like, oh, there you are, you're fine, and now I just have to clear out this leia.
The leia are tidy tips for
sorry, tidy tips.
On the people learning the botanic names out there.
Yeah.
I just want to note we have over 230 people tuning in to our very first Poppy Hour of all time, which is very heartening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. What else should we cover before we shift over to the philosophical conversation? Not that this hasn't had some philosophical elements to it so far.
I want to point out one of the species that is my favorite. One of the other things I think about in terms of the planting and what I've put in is that I have something available for the wildlife at all different times of year. So I have a lot of plants in bloom now that it's the spring, but I have also plants that bloom in the fall. And so this here is the sacred datura that is just sprouting and leafing out. And I started just with one plant, and they produce tons of seed, and they've self-seeded. You can see all these little seedlings are the sacred datura. And I love this plant in the summer and fall because it just produces tons of flowers. I just imagine, I've watched this plant a lot of evenings in hopes that I get a snapshot of a moth coming and visiting and nectaring on the plant, but I haven't observed it yet. But I'm sure it's feeding the moths. And then I also have this bladder pod, which blooms at all times of year. So I just like to make sure that there's something available. And then I also have lots of buckwheat. So that buckwheat is a Eriogonum umbulatum. And that is just getting ready to sprout. And I also have a California buckwheat, and I have ash buckwheat, and I have conejo buckwheat, the Eriogonum crocatum. I'm a big fan of buckwheat, so I have lots of different species of buckwheat. Here's the Eriogonum crocatum.
More yellow flowers. Like a year ago, I was talking to someone about how I'd love to have a yellow flowered native garden, and now I'm viewing one, which is really cool. I think that's a really fun design principle. Did you play with that consciously, or did it just kind of happen?
It just kind of happened. I have a couple, I have some purple. I have salvia bees bliss. I have a lot of lupins, and I have these penstemons, which add some contrast. I think what happened is the desert marigold and the tidy tips took over. And that would just really kind of infuses lots of yellow. But I think that adds a nice aesthetic, because when you go into nature, you'll oftentimes see big patches of color, things in a kind of a, especially with annuals, you'll see almost a monoculture of certain species. And that is often a very striking visual that I think I was able to create here, which is nice.
Yeah, that masses and drifts design principle for landscapes. It's really Really
Yeah.
great. We have just lots of rave reviews coming in. Christo says, great garden, Naomi, great diversity. Love the combo of desert plants. He's out in 29 Palms.
Somebody was asking what the sacred plant was. It's sacred datura, which is a super interesting plant. I think we should do an episode just on that plant. It's really fascinating. It's a native plant that grows in like deeply urbanized parts of the city. It's also a psychedelic plant, and it was a really important plant for Native Americans in Southern California.
It's
a great garden
plant of our garden tour this year.
Yeah, we also have amazing t-shirts. If anyone wants to buy a t-shirt, the garden plant shirt, Leslie Garden graphic of the Sacred Datura is totally beautiful. Yeah.
I did want to talk about my penstemons if there was some time to talk about these penstemons, because something
Tell us
really
about those penstemons.
something really cool happened with my penstemons this year, and I'm really excited to share. I love penstemon. It's one of my favorite groups, and I picked 2 penstemons to plant. Well, I have 3 penstemons. I have penstemon heterophyllus, penstemon, the scarlet bugler here, penstemon centranthifolius. The purple one back there is showy penstemon, penstemon spectabilis. And I know from my botany work that penstemon centranthifolius, the scarlet bugler, and the showy penstemon hybridize in nature. And the hybrid is gorgeous. It's got pink flowers, shocking pink flowers. So I thought, well, what would happen if I planted them side by side? Would they form a natural hybrid? And this is the first year that I got them. And they did. They hybridized in my yard. And now it's a named hybrid called Penstemon parishii. And it is a mix between both parents. It very much looks like both parents.
That color is amazing, and it's really coming through on your Zoom close-up. Well done there.
Yeah.
Really love that kind of very saturated red violet.
Yeah, and I'm sure the hummingbirds are the culprits, because I watch them from my window and they're visiting both penstemons, like between the same hummingbird will go between the showy penstemon and the scarlet bugler. And so they're cross-pollinating between both those species.
Our friend Connie Day wanted to know if you get birds eating the datura seeds.
That's a good question. I've not observed that, but it produces so much seed. I wouldn't doubt that there are lots of things eating the datura seed. I have definitely lots of goldfinches that appreciate the tidy tips patch and the Dahlias. I'm hoping eventually my incense cedar will grow, because I think I have a lot of birds, and I have a lot of birds that like to sit in the manzanita and on the penstemons, but I don't have trees for them. So I feel like I don't have birds that really love trees. But I do get quite a lot of birds eating seeds in the garden.
Awesome. Totally beautiful, Naomi. There's some more questions here about your garden. I think maybe if you could hang out afterwards to answer them. I'd like to kind of shift gears now and start talking about your professional life. I don't know if do you want to talk on your phone or switch to your computer? What do you?
I can switch to my computer.
Maybe while you're doing that, I'll just kind of reiterate the structure that we have planned today, which is we did a little tour with Naomi and her garden, and then now we'll shift over to a more philosophical conversation about the garden, or about, California native plants in general. And then we do consider this kind of a happy hour kind of vibe, cocktail hour. So at the end, if we have friends out there that we can bring up on screen, we're modeling this as a shortened version of our online native plant garden tour social. that we had the weekend of March 28th and 29th. And on Saturday evening, after the end of the first day, we brought a bunch of people on as into the panelist mode where we could mix and mingle and drink cocktails on Zoom and chat together. So I think that's what we're hoping to do at the end today for those of you that want to stick around and join us.
Yeah. And in most cases, we'll probably have two guests on each show where one will be showing their garden, and then we'll have someone talking about some aspect of native plant gardens or landscapes. In this case, Naomi's the perfect guest because she really can do both things. And we're gonna, as soon as she gets back on, we'll delve into her professional life. If you didn't hear my introduction of her, Naomi is the Director of Conservation Programs at California Botanic Garden. And we're going to talk about how, what that means and what she is doing to protect California native plants, and hopefully think about how you all might get engaged with that. And I see somebody actually asked the questions, how can you influence public policy and educational outreach to friends and neighbors? I think we'll try to discuss that in just a minute here. Are you back, Naomi?
I'm back.
Okay, welcome back. So I just kind of reintroduced you, if you didn't hear, as the Director of Conservation Programs at California Botanic Garden. Can you just basically give like a day in your life? Like, what does that mean? What does a plant conservationist do?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's pretty diverse. And one of the things I really love about my job is that I get to work in plant conservation from a lot of different angles. So I really think about it in this sort of very integrative way where, being able to carry out a plant conservation program at a botanic garden, I think provides that special opportunity, because we are a botanic garden that has really first-class research facilities. So we have an extraordinary herbarium, which is a museum of dried pressed plants. We have laboratories where we can carry out genetic research. We have expert field botanists who go out in the field and gather data on the ground. We have the largest seed bank dedicated to California native plants. So we're actively conserving the seeds, genotypes from the wild in our freezers as a backup and a way to hopefully save plants against extinction.
And I'll interject real quick. Sorry, that was when I worked as Naomi as my boss, when I used to manage the seed bank which it used to be called Rancho Santa Ana, now California. But
yeah,
I just want to paint the picture of that really quick. It's like this basically little structure house it's full of freezers, and in the freezers are the world's biggest collection of these rare and endangered seeds that are essentially like a Noah's Ark of biodiversity, which is pretty awesome. And yeah, Naomi was a great boss. So, okay, sorry, I cut you off.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden is now California Botanic Garden. And in a way, we took that name because we do so much, our mission is focused on California native plants. And we have an extraordinary program in plant conservation. And so we have this extraordinary seed bank, which is a tremendous resource for plant conservation. We have over 6,000 seed collections that represent over 2,000 species. And then we also have our growing facilities, our nursery, where we can learn the horticultural requirements for the most rare, threatened, and endangered plants. And we're actively growing them to support them, and also doing restoration projects. And so the program, I oversee this program that integrates all these elements together to enable plant conservation throughout the state. And so to me, that's a great privilege to be able to, one, work with plants in my everyday life. Like my job is to essentially save plants and to think about all the tools in our toolkit that we can use to employ to conserve plants. And that, in addition, includes education and outreach. And so educating the public about the importance of plants and disseminating that information that we gather, all this research, to land management agencies and other organizations so that they can make best decisions to protect plants.
Yeah, really, really an important program that I'm very happy to have been an alum and have gone through, because it is an amazingly diverse suite of things that are happening simultaneously to protect California native plants. And it's, yeah, so I'm curious, Naomi, in the short term, like how has Corona impacted your program? Like maybe like if you could, like just on the day-to-day now, obviously you're working from home. Are you able to go out and do the field work and stuff like that, or what's happening this year with coronavirus?
Yeah, it's certainly having an impact on our work. You know, conducting field work is a great challenge. It's not something that we can really do full force because we do a lot of work very far off remote regions that are quite far from California Botanic Garden. And we don't feel that it's safe for those communities and for us to be, you know, traveling far to carry out that field work. And so we're really staying, I'm sorry, this is my cat, Madeline, Kippy, sorry.
Cat Zoom bombs are the best.
Yeah, my cat's Zoom bomb all the time. So it has impacted our fieldwork. It's definitely impacted the scope of the program. I oversee a program that employs about 20 people, and unfortunately, we're not able to have our staff carry out the work that we had planned for the year. So it's an impact to the data gathering, the research that we plan to gather this year, but it's also an economic impact to our program. So it impacts us from these multiple angles.
I've been wondering, like, are there, you know, obviously there are all these articles about like less pollution, you know, less people driving around, less people on airplanes. Like, are there, do you see any benefits of this shutdown? Like for, like, are the wildlands going to get like a year with less people on them to, you know, regenerate? Is there like any silver lining of this from a plant conservation perspective?
Well, I think the silver lining perhaps is that maybe we can reimagine the way that we work and carry out our business on an everyday basis. And maybe we can think about new ways to travel less and still, you know, carry out essential work and perhaps improve our air quality and decrease congestion on roads, which we know is a perennial problem in Southern California. And so I think that's the silver lining, is maybe to kind of reimagine the way we live our lives. But there are consequences to this, even though there aren't people out on the landscape, or there's far fewer people out on the landscape. That means that those people who protect the landscape and are out there watching, making sure that all is good in our public lands, they're not out there kind of ensuring that, you know, there might be activities going on with extractive industries like mining, energy, and these sorts of things, where we rely on people who, you know, are watching the agencies to make sure that they're following the law and these, you know, guidelines. And if we don't have people out on the landscape, who's watching, you know, while we're currently under this administration, and we know that things have been happening on our public lands. And so I think that's something to really think about and consider, that I hope that we'll return to our public lands and that we'll be able to continue to protect them.
Yeah, the EPA is really weak right now. So I think that affects all of us so deeply.
Yeah,
I know. I'm weighing right now how political I should get.
Sorry.
I'm not gonna go there, but I will not take the bait, Naomi. But yeah,
do it, Evan.
Do it.
I want to jump back to just plant conservation in general, because there's two really important concepts that I think people who are interested in native plant gardening should know about a little bit about plant conservation. And one of those things you're kind of doing in your garden, and that's ex-situ conservation. And then there's something else called in-situ conservation. I wonder if you could just quickly kind of tell the audience what those are, Naomi, and how you maybe just give some example projects of how your program participates in those things.
Sure. In situ conservation means conservation in place, or plants, they live out on wildlands in the landscape, and so that's to protect plants where they live and to ensure that we're protecting their home and their habitat, and that they can continue to live out their lives throughout evolutionary time and, you know, just be a plant in the world. Ex-situ conservation is where we might gather seeds or cuttings or various plant material and bring it off-site to a place like a botanic garden or, you know, other facility where we're either propagating those plants, we're doing research perhaps to learn about the horticultural requirements, or we're saving seeds long-term as a backup to store genetic diversity off-site. And it might also be planting plants in our garden to educate the public about what plants exist, you know, how beautiful they are, what their names are, and how they might be used. Those are all different forms of ex-situ conservation, which ex-situ just basically means off-site, and in-situ means sort of in place.
Yeah, so I like that idea of ex-situ conservation being something that the public can participate in, and our viewers right now can participate in. Lois asked what she can do to, as kind of a member of the general public, to help influence this. She says influence public policy and do educational outreach to friends and colleagues. And I think that that's an example, is that you can plant, you know, so the plant that I wanted Naomi to show, which is unfortunately not blooming yet, Erigeron parishii, is a really rare plant that only occurs in the San Bernardino Mountains. And I think it's like, I don't know, how do you feel about planting really rare things in your garden, Naomi? I think
Yeah, I have 2 rare plants in my garden. One of them is not really readily available in horticulture, and that's the parish's daisy, Erigeron parishii. I don't want to give too many details about how I acquired that plant, but
From your work,
it lives in my garden. It's totally legal and fine. I also have Eriogonum crocatum, the conejo buckwheat, which is very, very restricted, very, very rare, occurs on volcanic substrates. If you are traveling between Camarillo, sort of Ventura, Oxnard, Camarillo area, and Los Angeles, like going up the 101 and you go up that grade, the conejo grade, that is the habitat of the conejo buckwheat. On those volcanics there, and it's restricted to those locations. Like it only occurs in that whole place in the whole wide world, and it's been pretty severely impacted. There's been wildfires that have gone through there and impacted those populations, but it's also readily available in horticulture, and I bought that at my local nursery, and I think it's grown pretty widely. On one hand, I think for people to be able to cultivate a rare, threatened, or endangered plant is to learn about that plant maybe, and learn about its limitations in the wild and why it's endangered, and to recognize, I think I've gotten interesting feedback from people before when people had not recognized that plants can be endangered as well as animals. It's not just polar bears or the wolf or the grizzly bear, or the desert tortoise. Plants also can be very highly threatened and endangered. So it gives those plants sort of a place in the spotlight for people to learn and enjoy. Nevin's barberry is a plant that is very rare, federally listed, and very widely available in horticulture. That is a very interesting story because on one hand, so Theodore Payne actually brought it into horticulture pretty early on, and he planted it up on the Angeles National Forest where it didn't occur naturally after the St. Francis Dam disaster in San Francisco Canyon. And inadvertently, he had a successful translocation of an endangered plant, because they still persist there today, and they're a very beautiful, wonderful, active population based on his plantings. And he also moved them up slope, so you might consider it a form of assisted migration. But the thing that's been confusing about that plant being in horticulture is that there are populations which we didn't know if they were actually native or if they were planted and or seeded by birds from horticultural sources. So it can make things confusing, but it also has the opportunity to support plants in the wild. So for instance, the population that's up on the Angeles National Forest that Theodore Payne planted turns out to be one of the largest populations that are left in the world. And it's genetically diverse because they produce almost exclusively by, they reproduce very easily by seed, and birds move them around. So
yeah, so obviously these two things, the in situ, which is like the kind of remnant of a pristine natural area, and then the ex situ, which is bringing biodiversity into human control, like these things are interacting with each other and being manipulated, maybe manipulate is not the right word, but they're interacting with each other, and there's some really interesting ways that that's being done. I think that you guys have done in California, BG, the grove, like the different, I don't know, I would call them like founder populations or tree orchards or ex situ groves. Can you talk a little bit about some of those and what those are and why you put those in?
Sure, we call them conservation groves, and we have particular rare species where we aren't able to store their seed in a seed bank. So for instance, oaks produce acorns, and the acorn has a seed that has high lipid content that doesn't respond well to drying. And the whole process about storing seeds long-term in storage is you dry the seed down and you put it in a freezer. If you did that to an acorn, the acorn would die immediately. So you can't put acorns into cold freezer storage. And so how would you go about conserving rare oak trees? One way to do that is to collect acorns from many different mothers and to keep those separated by the moms, and to bring those acorns back, propagate trees, and then to plant that in a grove. So you have different maternal lineages represented in the garden. So, you have almost a genetically diverse population. And that's one way to conserve genetic diversity offsite if you can't do that in a seed bank.
Yeah, which I think is something that has been done, like the Forest Service has done that. They've had tree, genetic orchards and things for a long time, but it's relatively new in botanical gardens to be tracking it. And so this kind of segues into like, what are you thinking about in the next 10 years? Like, what do you want to see happen in Southern California to conserve more of the plants that live here?
The first thing I'd like to see is less sprawl and development, because I think protecting wildlands is essential. It's still one of the most essential things that we can do to protect our plant diversity. Climate change is a huge major threat, and we don't know necessarily how plants will respond to climate change. But for many plants, concrete is just a nail in the coffin. That's just, you don't come back from your habitat being plowed over and paved over. So I think it's really essential that we protect our intact wildlands, and to make sure that we have corridors so that populations can exchange genetic information, and we're not cutting things off and fragmenting them. And we have the ability, I think, to make those connections by planting or integrating locally sourced native plants into our landscapes and creating these sort of genetic corridors in the urban core. So I think that we need to think about the urban core as an area for genetic exchange, where we can promote connectivity between areas that have been severed by concrete, and that those wild places that are still intact, we need to make sure that we protect those. And there's just so much at play in terms of protecting them, because we have the urban wildland interface. It's more than just sort of protecting them from concrete, but we have increased wildfire frequency. We have exotic invasive plants spreading. And so there's just a lot of things to kind of combat or to deal with to ensure protection of habitats and wetlands.
Right. One thing that someone had asked about, which we didn't even get, I don't know if I'll have a chance to really talk about it right now, but talking about the invasive species, and they brought up black mustard, which I think it was Georgia, if I can scroll back. Georgia, I just got messed up on a hike, the last hike I did, where I tried to go into a canyon to what I thought was a little cliff, and I thought it was going to have cool plants on it. So I went down this canyon in the Santa Monica Mountains, and I didn't realize that I was going through like a 3-mile thicket of black mustard, and it was the most horrendous situation I've ever been in hiking. I mean, that's a terrible, I didn't really know that plant that well until going through this thicket of it. It's a really nasty weed.
Yeah, and they're very dense and tall, and
yeah, and they're really dusty too. Like my face was like black with dust after I got through this thicket. And I almost stepped on a rattlesnake. So anyways, Naomi, as we're kind of wrapping up here, you sort of already alluded to this, but if you could just try to like maybe paint the picture in what does it look like? What is your utopian landscape for Southern California?
utopian.
What's a perfect?
Perfect.
Yeah.
I don't know that there is perfect. We live in an imperfect world, and I'm a realist, but but I do think, I think there's a lot of positive things that we can do, and I am optimistic that we can build a better future for Greater Los Angeles and Southern California. And to me, that includes making natural areas and healthy environments accessible to everyone. So that's something I think about a lot, growing in smog-ridden Southern California in the urban landscape. And I didn't really have a good sense of nature growing up. I felt divorced from it. I'd only felt divorced from it after I became a botanist and was able to immerse myself in it. And then I understood my connection to plants. And so I think building those connection to plants and to nature are important. And it's not even that, I mean, humans have a connection to, every human has a connection to nature and to plants. We breathe the air and we drink the water. It's just whether or not we realize it or not, and how, and if we are able to breathe clean air and drink clean water and have the benefit of having beautiful landscapes like I was able to create in my front yard. That's something tangible that we can make more accessible to communities that don't necessarily have access to that. So my utopian landscape would make nature more available to everyone, and to be able to integrate education about plants to, I wish I learned more about plants in K through 12. I didn't learn much about plants in K through 12. And so everyone needs to know that a plant made a difference in your life today. You didn't know it necessarily, but everyone should be able to recognize that. And it's really, I feel it's a privilege and a gift to recognize my connection to plants. And I only know that now that I get to be with them in this, like I get to go to nature for my job. Like that's amazing. Plants have just fundamentally changed my life. My life is better because I can interact with plants. And I feel like that's a gift I want to give back to the community I came from, Greater Los Angeles, is to allow Southern Californians to recognize the beauty of the plants that are indigenous to our area, because they're beautiful and they're magnificent. And we have so much diversity here that that lives with the resources that are provided here, with the rain that we get. And we don't need to transport water from other locations to feed plants that probably don't belong here. And I just think that's, so I want to see everyone have a climate appropriate landscape, and that I don't want, and we could stop robbing water.
Right. All right. So two major things is environmental equity, so that everybody in the city has access to nature and to learning about their local indigenous biodiversity, and sustainability, so that we're not, taking resources from distant lands to grow you know, random weird plants.
Yeah.
I like it. All right, Naomi, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you guys all for tuning in to Poppy Hour. Andrew, I see Andrew up here. He hasn't gotten a chance to talk much. What are you thinking, Andrew?
I'm thinking this is a great platform and I'm glad we're doing it.
All right. Nice beats. I like it.
Oh, thank you.
Margaret.
Should we, yeah, thank you, Naomi. That was amazing. I was thinking about how it would be wonderful if the native gardens in neighborhoods could be jumping off points, and what if all your neighbors became inspired and your whole street became variations of Naomi's garden. Some have more penstemons, some have less, but that's kind of a utopian vision I have for landscapes. Should we bring some other friends up and kind of chat around for another few minutes?
Yeah.
What's on to you, Evan?
Yeah. Let's start bringing some people on. We might just we'll send you invites, and we're going to switch to the grid view.
And I want to give a shout out. We can't bring people up from YouTube. We can only do it from Zoom, but I want to give a shout out to my friend Taryn from UC Irvine, who's a really powerful thinker and artist and environmental activist. And it was nice to see Taryn tuning in. Yeah, hello to all you wonderful people, and thank you for your comments of support. You know, we're treating this all as an experiment. We wouldn't have done this if it weren't for the coronavirus situation. And I really want to thank you, Evan, for your adventurous spirit and for sticking with your job as executive director, which you just started in January. And could not have predicted what you would need to face in just a couple of months with the Theodore Payne Foundation. So thank you.
Thank you, Margaret, for your adventurous spirit. And yeah, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have some cool ideas, see some cool gardens. And I don't know if anybody else is still on to join us virtually or.
I see Liv O'Keefe. Does anyone want to say anything? Drew, Reedy, are you there?
Here we got people coming.
Oh, I see Karen, and is that Andreas?
Yes.
Hello.
Actually, if Liv is on, oh, okay, great. So I'm excited to introduce next week's guest, Liv, for California for Native Plant Week. We have Liv from the California Native Plant Society will be joining us next week, same time, 5:30 Friday night. Hi, Liv.
Hey, everyone. Hi. Yeah, Nick and I are super excited to chat with you all next week.
58 people.
Nice.
Yeah, today was great, Naomi. That was super inspiring, and I think you did a fabulous job.
Virginia. Wow.
Thank you.
Well,
Is anyone drinking a good beverage?
I think I just finished my glass of wine. I was enjoying what Naomi had to say, and yeah, it was great. Yeah.
I'm drinking kombucha beer, which is my favorite beverage of choice. Not too many times a week, but you know, just a few.
Yeah. I don't know. I think COVID's like up to the number of times a week.
Yeah.
Moderation.
Hey, Margaret.
A little
Nice
too
to live.
many things at the ready there.
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Hey, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, how are you
Ooh,
guys?
You're in your garden right now.
I am.
Hi.
Amazing.
Although I love your background, Margaret.
Thank you. This is fun. This is our little, we have like a sort of garden tour reunion and other friends of Theodore Payne Foundation. It's exciting. Thanks, everyone. Dan is husband of DJ Peterson, our board president of Theodore Paine.
Yeah, I thought DJ was going to be online. I'm not sure where he is. I mean, he's in North Carolina, but he was the one that told me about it this afternoon. So he's got to be around somewhere.
Maybe he's on YouTube.
I'm not sure. Anyways, the tour was fantastic. You guys did an amazing job. I can't believe how you put that together.
Thank you. I can't believe how we put it together.
It really was great.
Everyone who was supposed to show up showed up, which was really impressive. And some people who had never used Zoom before were Zooming like masters after just a little bit of practice. So it's a really
turned out great.
Yeah, positive.
Switch it back to yourself, Margaret.
I have a question.
You have to unmute yourself.
Oh, I think I'm.
Yeah, I can hear you, Karen.
Oh, okay. Our host this evening our speaker this evening talked about, of course, seed conservation, and we had both spent some time when it was called Rancho, and I know that they do use freezers, but what about our amateur seed collectors? Like, we were a little concerned, like we were keeping a lot of seeds in our freezer. We collect seed every year. And, but isn't there a risk, like if you're going in and out or taking seeds in and out, that you can cause damage? Like, what do you think is like the best kind of seed storage for us gardeners that, you know, we don't have the kind of system in place that like a botanic garden has?
Yeah, sure. I think Evan could probably add to this as well. But so one of the things that might contribute to the death of seeds is the changing temperatures and humidity. So you do want to try to keep that stabilized. But we use freezers because we're hoping for very long-term storage. And so we dry them down probably drier than you would be able to dry your seeds down, because we use a desiccant in a chamber. And then we also get them colder, putting them in freezers, unless, I mean, you're putting them same temperature if you're putting them in a freezer. But I keep mine in a refrigerator, and that would extend the life of a seed. I think the main thing is you want to keep it in a constant environment, and you especially don't want changes or fluctuating in humidity. So you want some humidity control. Evan can speak to a seed experiment he participated in where they're in these vacuum sealed tubes, the seeds. And so there's a humidity control, but there's not temperature control. And those seeds have had a lot of longevity. You know, This experiment was started in the early 1900s. So.
Yeah, I think it was like the mid 40s when they actually started it, but they were stored at ambient room temperature in these super desiccated little glass tubes, and the amount of viability that they retained was incredible. Like, some of them were 100% as good as they were when they were harvested like 60 or 70 years ago. So the real thing is the humidity. If they get like wet, they're going to die really quickly. So I wouldn't worry too. Yeah, I think what Naomi said, a refrigerator is fine, but you can get an airtight chamber in your refrigerator to hold your seeds, that's good. And then have some way of having some desiccant inside of it so it doesn't get wet.
The silica gel packs that come in your shoe boxes are desiccant. How do those put them in with your
Something comes in beef jerky packs is what I
Yeah.
Just gonna say beef jerky.
Right.
I've been keeping mine in paper bags. Is that a bad idea? We did that in the seed room up at TPF. You know, there were things in the refrigerator, but those seem to be very specific species. And you know, I've been collecting seeds for a number of years now.
Yeah,
I haven't tested their viability, so I don't know.
It depends on your humidity. Like, if it's really humid, it's not good because paper will suck up humidity. But if it's dry, that's actually a pretty good way to store it because it'll be dry. But I think, yeah, the key is to get it dried first and then put it in some, like, if you think that paper bag is going to stay dry, it's probably fine. But if it's in like a shed that gets wet during a experiment, it'll suck up humidity.
No, it's in my office, and I'm close to the beach. The house never gets hot. So, and it's in a shaded, usually dark room.
Yeah, you're probably good that way.
Denise from YouTube asked about using Ziploc bags and if that was considered airtight enough.
I would not store
Plastic?
plastic. Plastic holds moisture.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I guess there's a difference too. You know, it's like when you're doing seed saving and you're collecting seeds, if you're collecting from fleshy fruits versus dry fruits, you know, when if you're collecting, say, from a barberry and you haven't processed, you haven't taken the fruit away yet, you want to treat it just like you would treat produce and kind of keep it cool, you know, make sure it doesn't start rotting. Whereas dry fruits, you want to keep in sort of paper bags or manila envelopes so that to keep them dry.
And of course, we have to put out a little disclaimer of always collect seeds ethically, and it's you can't just go out into like wild nature and collect seeds.
Yeah, I just collect them from my own plants.
Then that's cool. You should definitely do that.
Yeah, I was thinking about collecting seeds in the garden, not in the wild.
Yeah.
Good to clarify that.
Can we collect seeds at Rancho? Oh, California.
Have permission.
I think we still have some seeds we collected with permission from California. Rancho.
I didn't zoom in on my onions. I have onions in bloom, red skin onion, Allium hematochiton, and I got that from California Botanic Garden, where I was helping Antonio teach a native food class, and we were using materials from the garden, and we had extra bulbs. We were using it in native sage pesto. And so there was an extra bulb, and I just threw it in a little rock garden area of my garden, and they just have proliferated. And so that was just kind of a freebie from California Botanic Garden.
How are they for fresh salads?
That's great.
Oh, great.
You harvest your onions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a really good plant. It's like seems to spread around. It's really pretty. Yeah, I love UCLA in their native garden at UCLA Botanical Garden. That plant just goes crazy and it spreads around a lot. So yeah.
I had a question on the hybrid penstemon. How does that? I don't know how the hybridization process works. So I understand that it's a mix of the two parents, but
yeah,
where does the mix happen? Like before the plant grows? Like I don't know how that process works.
So what I imagine happened is a hummingbird came and stuck its head in both species, the flowers of each species, and transferred pollen from one parent to the other, and then that parent got the pollen from the other species, formed that pollen transfer, made a seed, and so my hybrid plants were born from those seeds from one of the mother plants and sprouted and had so the father was one species and the mother was another species, and their seed was a combination of both.
Got it.
Do you think you might have variations of the hybrid in future years?
I imagine the hybrid can like back cross with the parents. And so I don't know what kind of flower variation I might get into the future with just sort of now I might have a hybrid swarm. I don't know.
It's like a mule, it's right? Like a horse and a donkey makes a mule. Like that's basically what happened with the pencil.
Yeah, but I don't know that the hybrid is sterile, which a mule is.
You should collect seeds and find out.
Yeah, so I will see if I could probably read up on that. There's probably known information. I just personally don't know, and I'm assuming it's not sterile, and I'm assuming it can back cross with the parents. But
there's some really weird stuff that happens with hybridization too. Like there's something called intrageneric hybrids, where things that are fairly distantly related will hybridize. What's the one, the Lee Lenz one? I mean, Chiranthodendron.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, maybe in those cases, who knows? Maybe those things are morphologically divergent, but they're not really that, we treat them in different genera. So one's a Fremontodendron and then the other genus from Mexico. But maybe they're actually much closer related than we give them credit for, even though they're very morphologically different. And that's why they don't have those barriers to crossing. They haven't developed those over evolutionary time.
Has anyone ever heard of the chimpanzee?
The who?
Chimpanzee.
Is this a joke, Evan?
No, there's like actually like.
Don't we have one in the White House?
Oh.
But
Backless
funny. What is a chimpanzee?
Oh, well, I think that like people have speculated that they could probably create a chimpanzee human hybrid, like if they really wanted to. Like,
Does it have orange hair?
I think it would be more entertaining than what's there.
Oh, man.
This is gonna get political, but yeah, they might make better decisions.
Ooh. Better response to pandemics. Yeah. I just want to say what a sweet and wonderful community this is. I'm so impressed with who came out to Poppy Hour this evening and all the supportive comments.
Poppy Hour.
How many people can you guys see in, how many can we see in the grid? I have a grid of 9. Does everybody else?
Yeah, that's how many people are currently sharing video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
If we had 50, there would be little teeny ones?
Yeah.
Yes.
Something to strive for.
Yeah, so guys, let us know what you want to see and what you want to hear about and talk about. Actually, the seed conversation is a good preamble. I think is it 3 weeks? We're just kind of getting the schedule hashed out right now, but we're going to have Jenny Arnold, who runs the seed program at TPF, basically just talk about seeds. So we'll get a nice rundown on seeds then.
I have a question for Naomi.
And it would be nice to get a little word from her mentor, Michael Wall.
For sure. Oh yeah.
I have to zoom him in from Visalia.
Yeah.
Yes. Andreas, I don't know if you know that I worked at the seed bank there too. And so Michael was one of my mentors. I never actually worked for him, but he helped me a lot in my first couple of years working there. And I go stay with him up in Three Rivers. He's got an amazing house in Three Rivers, which last year there was a super bloom there. And I mean, God, that's so beautiful. The Kauai River drainage, there's these marble outcrops up there that have some endemic plants. Like there's a really cool monkey flower. Yeah, monkey flower. There's actually a buckwheat up there. It's a variety of Eriogonum nudum, called nudum variety murinum. And it's super showy. I think it's like, I don't know what it does in the summer. It probably kind of gets crispy like the other nudums, but it's more of like a canescent gray foliage. And when I saw it in the field, I was blown away. I was like, man, this is really nice. This should be in horticulture because it's a really cool buckwheat.
Clone it.
Yeah, I know. Gotta get up there. It's hard to get. It's a really crazy hike, and you have to cross over this. Only place I know where it grows are on these marble outcrops, and you have to drive across a really steep pasture and get access from the rancher, and then you have to hike from there. So it's not easy to get to.
Wow.
And I think to get there when it would be in seed would be really hard because it's super hot and dry, and you couldn't even drive. So you'd have to hike. You couldn't drive because you'd probably start a fire because it's all grassland that you have to go through. So you'd have to hike like 10 miles through the Sierra, and it's low elevation. It's like 1,000 feet or under. So it's just brutally hot.
Wow.
Yeah, I will get there someday. One of my goals is to get this buckwheat seeds because it's such a cool one.
Michael was one of my mentors also, so.
Oh man, awesome. Such a cool guy.
Yeah.
Was there a
Thank you all.
question? I thought there was a question.
Well, a couple of people, Naomi, were wondering about your manzanita and what species and when it was planted.
Sure.
And what size was it there? I think part of the question was.
Okay. It's a big berry manzanita, Arctostaphylos glauca. I planted it in 2012 and I was in a 1 gallon size. It was probably about 6 inches tall above ground. So it was small. And it took a couple years, you know, it took a few years for it to take off. Last year was the first year it ever flowered. So last year was my first flowering year, and this year it flowered again, and it has some fruits on it right now.
You know, can I ask a question about the flowering? Not with that plant. I have an ironwood that I planted 6 years ago. The thing is taller than the apartment building next to me, and it has never flowered.
It might just need some more time. It might need to build more energy before it launches into reproduction. Like, I think they can put on a lot of growth and get big, but not be ready to reproduce. So the manzanita, I was really excited when it flowered last year, but it had been about the same size for a couple of years and it hadn't flowered. And so it took some time.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for tuning in to Poppy Hour #1. I hope to see you all next week.
It's a great idea, you guys. Thank you very much for organizing it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Connie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Kathy Kramer. See you. Thanks for your kind note. And thanks for joining us.
And thank you, Naomi, for joining us, being our first guest.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Naomi.
On this. Yeah. And also, just very quickly before we go, shout out to my nephew, James Jr., who's joining us.
Hi.
That's what? Whoa, cool. Family connections. We'll have to Zoom with you separately.
No drinking.
Little underage there, but yeah, I just want to say that, you know, this is something I was looking forward to all week. It's hard times, and it's really nice to have things to look forward to. And
Are you feeling rested yet?
What was that?
Feeling rested yet?
I don't know if I can feel rested right now, but I'm trying. Yeah, getting better. Grad school started, so it's hard. The rest.
During this pandemic, every day is like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Connie.
No, that's all right. I was just going to say to Margaret and Philip, next time you walk by, shout and we can say hello from 6 feet apart.
Sounds great. We're walking distance from Connie. We should do that.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, I have a 6 foot by 20 foot deck. You can have a beer. You know, a beverage of your choice out in the backyard.
Wow. Thank you for the invitation.
That's an invite.
I look forward to that. Yeah.
Pardon, my phone's going off and there it goes.
Erica Collins, let's Zoom tomorrow.
Oh, all right, sure.
We're gonna send you a special invitation. And
all right.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. See you next week, guys.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
Be well. Bye.
How do I leave?
Ending the meeting.